Thank you. Mr. Walsh, you're up for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee, it's an honor to be here today to discuss the implementation of the nuclear agreement with Iran and our P5+1 international partners. Let me begin first by looking at Iran's compliance with the JCPOA. The JCPOA is a nuclear agreement. It's not an agreement on regional relations, human rights, or other issues. And it's a nuclear agreement for good reason. Denying Iran nuclear weapons is the uncontested single most important American objective in the Gulf. Yes, Iran supports policies that run contrary to American interests, but the only thing worse than an Iran that does bad things is an Iran that does bad things and has nuclear weapons. It's also worth noting, as I have explained in past testimony, that the JCPOA is arguably the strongest multilateral nonproliferation agreement negotiated in the nuclear age. No country has been subjected to the kind of intrusive inspection and verification embodied in this agreement. Today, IAEA has more inspectors on the ground in Iran than ever before. To assess Iran's compliance, I use a variety of metrics. 1, Iran's implementation of specific provisions. Did Iran remove 98% of its uranium stockpile? Yes. Did Iran dismantle 2/3 of its centrifuges? Yes. Did it destroy the calandria of the Arak reactor? Yes. Time does not permit me to go through the whole list, but I think you get the idea. Next, I look at 2 assessments by others. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the U.S. intelligence community, our European partners, including Britain, France, Germany, and the EU, have all concluded that Iran is in compliance with its obligations. The Israeli military, for its part, has changed its threat assessment as a result of the nuclear agreement. Let me turn now to Iran's regional activities. Iran's regional activities pose problems for U.S. interests in the region, but by way of context, few countries in the Middle East have been shy about meddling in the affairs of their neighbors. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, for example, have all recently intervened in other countries directly or through proxies. Moreover, these practices have been a prominent feature in the region for decades. Now, none of this means that Iran's unwanted behavior should be simply accepted. It shouldn't. What it does suggest, however, is that regional meddling is not new, it is unlikely to go away anytime soon by any of the players, and it should be judged in context and not in isolation. In short, this is the Middle East, and it has been like this for a very long time. But when it comes to Iran, ambition is one thing, capability is another. Indeed, when one looks at the Iranian-Saudi rivalry, it's pretty clear who has the upper hand. In this competition, the kingdom is supported by the Gulf Emirates, Pakistan, Egypt, and the U.S., among others. The Iranian side is poor and weak by comparison. It includes Lebanon, a weak state, Syria, in the middle of a civil war, and possibly Iraq, although I doubt that for the long term, but is also fighting a war on its own territory. Saudi Arabia alone, without counting its many allies, is far wealthier than Iran and outspends its rival on defense. The International Institute for Strategic Studies reported that Saudi Arabia spends almost 4 times as much on its military as Iran. It goes on to conclude that, quote, Saudi Arabian armed forces remain the best equipped of all of the states in the region except Israel. So while Iran may have aspirations of hegemony, it lacks the economic and military capabilities to achieve that status, particularly in a region where Sunnis vastly outnumber the Shia. Terrorism. Iran is said to be the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, though some experts would instead point to Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. Critics of the agreement have suggested that it would free resources that Iran would use to use for increased terror activity. As my past testimony explains, there are reasons to doubt this. In addition, I went back and tested the proposition using the University of Maryland's Global Terrorism Database. I examined terror attacks for all 4 groups that Iran has supported in the past. The results are striking and surprising. First, terror attacks by the most active groups are all significantly down from their historic highs. More tellingly, attacks are all down beginning around 2013, 2014. That is to say, with the JPOA and the JCPOA. Now, one will have to keep an eye on this to see if it changes, but to date, the data is clear. The rise in terror attacks by Iranian-backed groups predicted by critics simply did not happen. Ballistic missiles. Under the Security Council resolution, Iran is, quote, called upon not to carry out ballistic missile tests of nuclear-capable missiles. To be clear, the language in the resolution does not mandate that Iran end missile tests, and the resolution actually provides for missile technology transfers in the agreement. Since the time its cities were attacked by ballistic missiles by Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, Iran has viewed missiles as a defense need, not surprisingly, and it has achieved virtual self-sufficiency in that program. Sanctions cannot change that reality. Only a reduction of regional tensions can do that, but until then, the U.S. has other options at its disposal. In conclusion, I believe that Congress has an important role to play in the JCPOA's implementation, and I stand ready to work with this committee to make sure we achieve our common goal and our first priority, ensuring that Iran never acquires nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.